The night his new roommate walked in, Seo Ji-hoon's body froze before his mind could react. Because the boy who once destroyed his life was now standing in his doorway, holding a key, and looking at him like he was the one who broke him. Ji-hoon had spent exactly 47 minutes making the small Seoul apartment feel like a fresh start. He had placed his books on the shelf in alphabetical order. He had set his coffee mug on the left side of the kitchen counter, a decision, not a habit. He had stood at the window and looked out at the Han River glittering 3 blocks south and told himself, quietly and firmly, that this was it. New city. New chapter. The past was a country he no longer lived in. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and really I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Then the door opened. And everything Ji-hoon had built in 47 minutes collapsed in under 3 seconds. Kang Yoon-ho stood in the frame like he had always been there, tall, powerfully built, moving with the kind of controlled precision that made the air around him feel different. Sharper. Heavier. His jaw was harder than Ji-hoon remembered. His shoulders wider. But the eyes were identical, dark, unreadable, carved from something that did not bend. Those eyes swept the apartment once, catalogued every detail in a single pass, and then landed on Ji-hoon. And they did not move. Ji-hoon waited for surprise. He waited for discomfort, for the social scramble of a man caught somewhere he didn't expect to be. He waited for anything that would make this moment feel accidental. What he got instead was worse. Kang Yoon-ho looked at him, and something in that cold, armored face went very, very still. Not frozen. Not shocked. Still, the way a man goes still when he finally finds something he has been looking for. It looked like relief. Ji-hoon's throat locked. He wanted to be a stranger in that doorway. He wanted to be no one, just a face Yoon-ho couldn't place, a coincidence, a clerical error made flesh. Instead, he was a wound that someone else was standing in front of, breathing hard and trying not to show it. Yoon-ho stepped inside. He set his key on the counter. He picked up the first of 3 boxes stacked in the hallway and carried it to the second bedroom with mechanical, unhurried precision, as if this were simply the next item on a list. As if Ji-hoon were not standing 3 feet away with 5 years of damage burning through his chest. He made 2 more trips. Never rushed. Never explained. And then, from the doorway of the second room, without turning around, Kang Yoon-ho said one word. Ji-hoon. Not a greeting. Not an apology. Not a question. Just his name. Spoken the way you say the name of something you never stopped thinking about. The door clicked shut. And Seo Ji-hoon stood alone in his fresh start, in his new apartment, in his new city, and understood, with cold and total clarity, that the past had not stayed where he left it. It had simply been waiting for him to stop running. He did not sleep. Ji-hoon lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and let the memories come, because fighting them had never once worked, and he was too tired tonight to pretend otherwise. They arrived in order, the way trauma always does. Not chaotic. Precise. The classroom. 17 years old. Ji-hoon had stayed up 3 nights straight on a group project, had cross-referenced every source, had produced something he was genuinely proud of, and Kang Yoon-ho had stood up in front of 30 students and 1 teacher and said, with that flat, unbothered voice, that Ji-hoon had copied it. That he had seen him do it. That he had the proof. He didn't. There was no proof. But Yoon-ho's voice carried the kind of certainty that didn't need evidence, and every head in that room turned toward Ji-hoon with the slow, terrible weight of a verdict already decided. Then the rumors. They spread the way lies always spread when the right person tells them, fast, total, unstoppable. Ji-hoon's family was in debt. Ji-hoon had cheated his way through every exam. Ji-hoon had done something, somewhere, that made him the kind of person you didn't stand next to. None of it was true. All of it stuck. And then the principal's office. Standing there trembling, not from guilt but from the sheer humiliation of having to defend himself against a lie so complete that defending it felt like losing. 3 weeks later he transferred. He rebuilt. Slowly. The kind of slow that leaves scar tissue. At 7 in the morning, Ji-hoon called the housing agency. The woman on the line was polite and immovable. Room transfers required a minimum processing window. 3 weeks minimum. He thanked her in a voice that gave nothing away, ended the call, and sat at the edge of his bed with his phone in both hands. 3 weeks. He had survived worse. He would survive this. He stood, pulled on a clean shirt, and walked to the kitchen to make coffee before work, and stopped. On the counter, in the exact spot where he had placed his mug the night before, sat a covered plate. Steam rose from the edges of the lid in thin, curling threads. No note. No explanation. No sound from the second bedroom. Ji-hoon stood very still and looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked up his bag and walked out the front door without touching it. He came back that evening and the plate was gone, washed, and returned to the cabinet. Ji-hoon set his bag down and stood in the kitchen and waited. 30 seconds later, Yunho emerged from the second room, still dressed, unhurried, reading something on his phone. He glanced up once, registered Ji-hoon's presence, and moved to fill a glass of water. "You left without eating." It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered in that low, even voice that had not changed in 5 years. "I didn't ask you to cook for me." Ji-hoon kept his voice level. "You came home past midnight. The refrigerator was empty." Yunho set the glass down. "I cooked. There was extra." "Don't." Ji-hoon stepped forward. "Don't make it sound like logistics. I need you to understand something. We are not roommates who take care of each other. We are 2 people stuck in the same space for 3 weeks because an agency made an error. That's all this is." Yunho looked at him. That steady, unreadable look that gave nothing and took everything. "All right. I need ground rules." "All right. You stay on your side. I stay on mine. Shared spaces we use without overlap when possible. No conversation beyond what's necessary." "No." Ji-hoon stopped. He had expected resistance. He had built the entire speech around resistance. Yunho's complete, quiet agreement was somehow more disarming than any argument. "No personal questions." "No, nothing." "All right," Yunho said again, and turned back toward his room. That was it. No pushback. No negotiation. No reaction whatsoever. Ji-hoon stood in the kitchen alone and felt the strange, hollow frustration of a war declared to an enemy who had simply laid down his weapons without a word. That night, well past 10, Ji-hoon's bedroom wall carried the low sound of a phone call from the hallway. Yunho's voice, stripped to almost nothing, clipped, careful, deliberate. The words were too low to catch. Except one phrase, sharp and clear through the thin wall. "He doesn't know yet. Keep it that way." A week passed. Ji-hoon catalogued it the way a man catalogues weather, not because he wanted to, but because something in him could not stop. Monday, the building's front lock jammed. Ji-hoon had his phone out to call maintenance when he found the lock already disassembled on the hallway floor. Yunho crouched over it with tools Ji-hoon didn't know they owned, fixing it with the focused calm of someone who had done it 100 times. Wednesday, a pipe under the kitchen sink began to drip. Ji-hoon woke to find it already repaired and the cabinet under the sink dried out and relined. Ji-hoon said nothing about either. Yunho offered no explanation for either. Friday, a company dinner, one of those mandatory gatherings where everyone wore their professional face and drank too carefully. Ji-hoon had mentioned the venue once, in passing, without thinking. Yunho was there when Ji-hoon arrived, not with him, not waiting for him, simply already present at the bar with a glass of water, speaking to no one. A coworker named Byung-chan, 2 drinks in and feeling bold, made a comment about Ji-hoon's presentation that was not feedback. It was mockery, delivered with a smile designed to look like humor. The table laughed, the way people laugh at things they know are wrong because it is easier than stopping them. Yunho turned his head. He didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at Byung-chan with those dark, flat eyes, and the temperature of that specific corner of the room dropped so fast that Byung-chan stopped mid-laugh, cleared his throat, and found something very interesting to study in his drink. Nobody acknowledged what had happened. Nobody had to. Later, across the crowded room, Ji-hoon looked up and found Yunho already watching him. Not with the cold satisfaction of someone who had won something. Not with anything that could be read or dismissed. With guilt. Quiet, careful, 5 years deep guilt, worn on a face that had never, in all the time Ji-hoon had known it, shown anything at all. Ji-hoon looked away first. He didn't know what to do with that. He had no shelf built for it. No cabinet, no corner. Kang Yunho was supposed to be the version of himself that Ji-hoon had perfectly, surgically defined, and that version did not carry guilt. So what was this version? And why did the question feel so much more dangerous than the answer? It was a Tuesday. Ordinary in every way that mattered. Ji-hoon was looking for a phone charger, the short one, the one that actually fast-charged, and after checking every drawer and pocket and surface in his room without success, he remembered the shared storage closet in the hallway. He had shoved a box of cables in there the first night, during unpacking, before everything changed. The closet was deep and cluttered with the layered evidence of 2 people occupying the same space without ever quite merging. Ji-hoon's boxes on the left. Yunho's on the right. Clean, precise, labeled in handwriting that was exactly what you'd expect, controlled, uniform, no wasted motion. The charger wasn't in the first box. Or the second. He reached toward the back shelf and his hand caught the edge of something else. A worn envelope, cream-colored, wedged between the shelf and the wall like it had been placed there carefully, and then not moved for a very long time. Ji-hoon almost put it back. Almost. He turned it over. No name on the front. The flap was loose, not sealed, just folded. He stood in the dim closet light, and told himself it wasn't his business. Then he opened it. Inside, a series of printed messages. The paper was faded at the folds, handled often, kept for years. The exchange was between 2 parties. One identified only as Director K. The other, unnamed in the header, but Ji-hoon didn't need a name. He knew the handwriting. Asterisk, the CO boy is getting too close to the investigation. Push him out. Asterisk. Ji-hoon's chest tightened. Asterisk, use whatever method is necessary. Discredit him. Isolate him. If he transfers, the family's exposure ends. Asterisk. His hands were very still. His breathing was not. Asterisk, you will do this, Yunho. Or your father pays the price. Asterisk. And then the reply. Short. Final. Asterisk, I understand. Done. Asterisk. Ji-hoon read it 3 times. Then he sat down on the floor of the closet, back against the shelf, the envelope in his lap, and did not move for a long time. The thing in his chest, the architecture he had spent 5 years building, every wall and beam of it load-bearing, every piece labeled Kang Yunho did this to me, did not shatter. It just cracked. One long, quiet fracture, running floor to ceiling, through the center of everything. He looked up. Yunho was standing in the doorway of the closet. His eyes dropped to the envelope. He saw exactly what it was. And he did not move, did not speak, did not reach for it or explain it or step forward. He simply stood there. And waited. Asterisk, now that you know the truth has been found, do you think Ji-hoon can ever separate what Yunho did from why he did it? Or is some damage just too deep to undo? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed. Ji-hoon threw the envelope. It left his hand before he made the decision to throw it. His arm moved on its own, 5 years of compressed fury finding the only exit it could. The papers scattered between them. Yunho's hand came up and caught the envelope itself in one clean motion, the way a man catches something he expected. Rain hammered the window. The apartment lights felt too bright and too small for what was happening inside them. You ruined me. Jihun's voice came out steadier than he felt. Good. He needed steady. I know. Yunho looked at the envelope in his hand. Did not look away from it. You stood in front of 30 people and called me a liar. You took everything I had worked for and you burned it in front of an audience. You made me into someone who didn't exist. Jihun stepped forward. You had a choice. Yunho's eyes came up then. Dark. Absolutely direct. I had a father. The rain filled the silence between those two sentences like water filling a room. And then something happened that Jihun had never once prepared for. The composure, that total, architectural, 5 years and counting composure, came apart. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just a fraction, like a wall developing its first crack under pressure it was never built to hold. Yunho's jaw tightened. His shoulders dropped a single centimeter. And his voice, when it came, was stripped of everything that had always kept Jihun at distance. Every single thing I did to you, I did it knowing you would hate me for it. That was the cost. I calculated it. I paid it every single day for 3 years. He set the envelope on the counter without looking at it. I chose your safety over your opinion of me. I would choose it again tomorrow. Jihun's chest hurt. Not the hot hurt of anger. The cold, deep hurt of something true landing somewhere it had no good place to go. He didn't cry. He had learned not to cry about Kang Yunho years ago. He did something worse. He believed him. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of an entirely different thing than the silence from the first night, not the compressed weight of old wounds, but the raw, terrifying openness of a man standing in front of another man with nothing left between them. Yunho took one step closer. Not toward comfort. Not toward contact. Just closer. The reason they wanted you isolated, he said quietly, wasn't random. His eyes held Jihun's without flinching. Jihun, you need to know what you are to them. Yunho said his father's name first. Not Jihun's. His own father, a man Jihun had never met, had never had reason to think about, had never once placed inside the story of his own destruction. But that was exactly the point. That was where the story had actually started. Yunho's father had worked adjacent to an investigation, not as the target, but as a man who knew too much and had the poor judgment to write some of it down. Director K's organization had been moving money through channels that crossed into places they were not supposed to cross, and Jihun's father, a mid-level government records auditor with a reputation for thoroughness, had flagged a discrepancy that nobody was supposed to notice. He had mentioned it to a colleague. That colleague had a connection. That connection had a name. And that name reached Director K within 48 hours. Jihun was 17 at the time. His father was already gone, a car accident 18 months before, ruled clean, filed and closed. Jihun had never questioned it. He had no reason to. Your father found something, Yunho said. They were sitting at the kitchen table now. No lights except the one above the stove. The rain had not stopped. He documented it. Whatever he found, copies of it existed. And Director K believed that if you stayed close to certain people at that school, you might eventually find them. Or someone might use you to find them. Jihun's hands were flat on the table. Very still. I was 17. You were a thread that connected to something they needed buried. Yunho's voice was even. It was the evenness of a man who had rehearsed this conversation in his head so many times it had worn grooves. If you transferred, you were out of reach. Out of the network. The connection severed itself. And you were the one they chose to transfer me. My father owed Director K a favor. Or rather, Director K had decided my father owed him one. Yunho looked down at the table. I was given instructions. Clear ones? I was told what would happen to my father if I didn't follow them. The kitchen was very quiet. Ji-hoon sat with it. Let it move through him. The 5-year case he had built, every exhibit, every piece of evidence, every verdict, shifted in his chest like furniture being rearranged in the dark. The story was the same. Every action was the same. Only the reason had changed. And somehow that changed everything. 5 years, Ji-hoon said. You let me hate you for 5 years. Yes. You never tried to explain. No. Why? Yunho looked up. His eyes were the steadiest thing in the room. Because if you knew, you would have fought back. That is who you are. You would have gone looking for answers, for evidence, for justice. The words came out with absolute certainty. And they would have killed you. The way they killed your father. He held Ji-hoon's gaze and did not soften what came next. They still might. The rain hit the window. The light above the stove hummed. Seo Ji-hoon sat across from the man who had dismantled his entire adolescence, and understood, with a clarity that felt like grief, that he had never once been the target. He had only been the door. Ji-hoon's work email was hacked on a Thursday morning. He discovered it at his desk, the inbox wiped, 2 years of project files inaccessible, a single message in the drafts folder that he had not written. No text. Just a photograph. An exterior shot of his apartment building, timestamped 11:47 p.m. the previous night. His bedroom window lit from inside. His hands went cold. He forwarded it to no one. He closed the laptop. He sat at his desk for the remainder of the workday and did not let his expression change once. That evening, exiting Mapo Station, he felt it, the specific awareness of being tracked that is not instinct but pattern recognition. A man in a gray jacket. Present at the station entrance. Present at the crosswalk. Present at the corner of his street before turning away at the last moment with the deliberate casualness of a professional. Ji-hoon got home and locked the door and stood in the hallway breathing. Yunho came out of his room and took one look at him and said nothing. He crossed to the window and looked down at the street for a long moment. Then he turned around. Pack what you need for tonight. Bring it to my room. I'm not. One door, Yunho said, is easier to guard than two. He said it the way he said everything, without drama, without room for argument, as if the logic was simply the logic and emotion had no seat at this table. Ji-hoon packed a bag. He moved it to Yunho's room. He told himself it was tactical. He lay on the far side of Yunho's bed in the dark and listened to the city outside and felt the particular tension of a body that cannot decide whether to fight or rest. The room smelled different from his own, clean, understated, a trace of something cool and quiet that he had no name for. Sometime past midnight he woke. Yunho was not in the bed. He was at the window, seated in the single chair, fully dressed, watching the street below with the focused stillness of someone who had done this before. Many times. Ji-hoon watched him from the dark and said nothing. Then, without turning from the glass, Yunho spoke. Low. Almost to himself. In high school. After everything, I used to walk to your street at night. Stand across from your building and watch for your light to come on. A pause. I needed to know you got home. Ji-hoon did not respond. He lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and felt something shift in his chest that had no clean name. Not forgiveness, not love, not the absence of pain. Something more complicated than all of them. Something that felt like the very beginning of a choice he wasn't ready to make. He didn't go back to sleep. Is this the moment everything changes between them? Or is it already too late? Tell us what you're feeling in the comments, and subscribe. They came for Ji-hoon on a Friday. He was leaving the building's side exit, the one he'd started using after the subway incident, the one he thought was less visible, when the two men stepped in from the alley. Not loud. Not dramatic. Professional, the way a closed door is professional. One positioned to his left, one directly ahead, and the message was entirely in the geometry. Jihun's bag hit the ground. His pulse hammered in his ears and his mind went very, very clear, the way minds go clear when the body understands that thinking is now the most important thing it does. He didn't run. He stood completely still and looked at the man ahead of him, and said nothing. Then, from behind the man on the left, a sound. One footstep. Deliberate. Kan Yunho walked into the alley like he owned the air in it. What followed lasted less than 90 seconds. Jihun would remember it in fragments later, not because it was chaotic, but because it was the opposite. Precise. Controlled. Yunho moved through the space between those two men the way water moves around stone, finding the exact point of least resistance at exactly the right moment, applying force where force mattered and none where it didn't. One man went down hard against the wall. The other turned to run and stopped, reconsidered, and chose the ground instead. Then it was quiet. Yunho stood in the center of the alley. His breathing was elevated. A cut above his left brow was bleeding in a thin, dark line down the side of his face. He looked at Jihun. Jihun picked up his bag. They walked home without speaking. In the apartment, Jihun sat Yunho on the edge of the bed and opened the first aid kit from under the sink, and cleaned the cut above his brow with the focused care of someone who needed to do something with their hands. The wound wasn't deep. It would bruise. He pressed a gauze pad to it, and held it there, and their faces were close. Closer than they had been in 5 years, closer than either of them had planned. Neither moved. Then, very quietly, Jihun said, "You chose this." Again. Yunho's eyes met his. "I'll keep choosing it." The gauze was still in Jihun's hand. His other hand had stopped moving. It was resting against the line of Yunho's jaw, not holding, not pressing. Just there. Either of them acknowledged it. Either of them moved away from it. Jihun's voice, when it came, was so quiet it barely existed. "Don't make me forgive you and lose you in the same week." Director K's name appeared in a national newspaper on a cold Tuesday morning in November. The article was careful, the kind of careful that meant lawyers had read it 17 times, but the shape of it was clear. A financial investigation. A chain of records traced back through 2 decades of misdirection. Evidence submitted anonymously through a registered legal channel, compiled with the precision of someone who had spent years making sure every document was unchallengeable. Jihun read the article at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around his coffee mug. On the second page, buried in a paragraph about the evidence trail, was a single reference to an audit record originally filed by a government employee named Seo Juno, Jihun's father. Flagged 18 months before his death. Preserved, somehow, in a chain of documentation that had ended up in the right hands at the right time. Jihun set down the mug. He sat very still in the morning light and let himself feel the full weight of it, not just the justice of it, but the years of it. His father had seen something. Had tried, in the quiet and careful way of a man who believed in systems, to say something about it. And the world had tried to erase both the record and the man. It had not succeeded on either count. 3 months later, late February, the sky the particular pale gray that comes before spring commits to arriving, Jihun's work was on a gallery wall. 8 pieces. Large format. Digital compositions built from fragments of city photography and hand-drawn line work, layered until the images held the specific weight of things remembered rather than simply seen. The gallery was in Hongdae, the walls white, the crowd warm and noisy with the energy of people who had come because they wanted to, not because they had to. Jihun moved through the room and spoke to people and smiled when he meant it, and thanked the gallery owner, and accepted a glass of something cold he didn't drink. He found Yunho at the back. Not near the crowd. Not speaking to anyone. Standing in front of the largest piece. The one that had taken Jihun 4 months to finish, the one built from memory photographs of a street he had once lived on, layered over and over until the original image was almost entirely replaced by what he had chosen to put on top of it. Yunho stood in front of it with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the expression of a man looking at something he recognizes. Jihun stopped beside him. They stood together in front of the image for a moment without speaking, not the old silence, not the full, compressed silence of the apartment doorway. This silence was easy. It was the silence of two people who had run out of things to perform for each other. "You were always going to be the only one, weren't you?" Jihun said. Not a question. Yunho turned his head. His eyes, in the gallery light, were exactly what they had always been, dark, direct, completely still. And warm. The warmth that existed only in this specific context, in this specific company. The warmth that, Jihun now understood, had always been there. Buried under 5 years of damage that had been done in service of keeping him alive. "From the moment I saw you," Yunho said. They left the gallery together. Back at the apartment, their apartment, the 3-week arrangement that had become something neither of them had named but both of them had chosen, Jihun stood at the kitchen counter and picked up the key. The old one? The one Yunho had walked in with on the first night, the one that had been sitting on the counter ever since like an object waiting to find its meaning. He turned around. Yunho was watching him from the doorway of the kitchen, jacket still on, the gallery light still in his eyes. Jihun crossed the room and pressed the key into Yunho's palm and closed his fingers around it. "Stay," he said. Yunho looked down at the key. Then up. And for the first time in all the years Jihun had spent studying every line of this man's face for danger, for coldness, for the angle of the next wound, what he found was simply this. A man who had always been here. Who had chosen, again and again, in the dark and without credit and without any promise of return, to stay between Jihun and the things that wanted to reach him. Yunho's hand closed around the key. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Some things don't require words. Some things live entirely in the weight of a hand, the warmth of a closed fist, and the particular quality of a silence that has finally become a home. And that is where their story rests, not at an ending, but at a beginning that was always waiting on the other side of the hardest thing either of them had ever survived. If this story moved something in you, if Jihun and Yunho found their way into the part of you that believes in people choosing each other against every reason not to, tell us in the comments. We read every single one. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story on this channel, because every story we tell is made for people like you, people who stay until the end, who feel everything, and who understand that the most powerful thing in the world is not strength or money or control. It is the decision, made quietly and without audience, to keep choosing someone. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose night you might change. Until next time, thank you for watching. Thank you for staying.